Hey everybody, it's Dave here and Darren over there. We're your two old bloggers and we're here this Sunday afternoon to talk Minnesota Vikings as usual. We've done it for over 2 decades apiece publicly and we've taken it to YouTube and we now do it live on Sundays. At least for now. Today we've got another exciting show scheduled for you. We have numerous topics today, starting out with Kwesi trading Za'Darius Smith to the Cleveland Browns. Was it a good move? Let you decide. Secondly, we're going to get into whether the schedule is favorable for the Vikings or not. We're going to be analyzing it and coming to our own conclusions. Darren's going to bring up a few things he thinks are important, and I will as well. Followed by our section called Quick Hitters. And there, you're getting bonus content because we have 3 topics. First one's going to be cornerback feelings. Do the corners have feelings? We'll talk about it. Then comes safety spaces. Safety spaces, Dave. Don't you mean safe spaces? No, I mean more than just safe spaces. I mean a lot more. We're talking about speed, aggression, and all-out malice. And then we'll close the show with our tribute, our RIP, to the great Joe Kapp. Coming up next on Two Old Bloggers. Vikings First and SKOL presents This Week in Vikingsland with Darren and Dave, your two old bloggers. Hey everybody, we're back again. And first off, I want to acknowledge everybody that's showing up in chat. Jason, Justin, Bob, Norsphesis. Love that one now, buddy. My worthless opinion. The great and gracious Mary Fisk. Hopefully she got her Mother's Day calls and wishes today. Good old Raymond. And who else is in there that I'm missing? Of course, Davey Chains, my buddy, who sent me an article about budget bourbons. Love it, Davey. Love it. Appreciate it so much. And hey there, Chuck. Glad you could join us. We are about to get this show absolutely rolling, and it's going to be a good one. Hey there, Doug.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Let's move over to the slideshow presentation portion of the show. And we started off, we titled this one, Za'Darius Smith traded to the Browns. Did Kwesi do the right thing? Question is, did he? Now on to theme 1. Za'Darius traded?
Indeed he was, Dave. Dropped on Friday, we learned that Z Smith is no longer a Minnesota Viking. That seemed like a bit of a foregone conclusion, I think, because you got a player upset, not happy with his contract, didn't want to be here. Vikings weren't really interested in and he sent out a social media post a couple of months ago that caught the Vikings off guard, I think, and then he sold his house. So there was a bunch of things that indicated that Za'Darius Smith was not going to be a Viking in 2023. So this isn't a surprise, but when you make a deal like this, there was speculation all through, through fandom about what the Vikings could get or what they should get if they decided to move on from Za'Darius Smith and trading him. There's all kinds of different opinions, some of them realistic and some of them not realistic. And so we should get 2 number ones for Za'Darius Smith. Well, that ain't happening. You might be able to, I don't think you could get 2 new number ones for Za'Darius Smith after 2019 when he had his best year ever. But be that as it may, we found out what the compensation was and what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah got for him on Friday. And I don't, looking at the deal, I understand why it had to be made. I think that, you're losing, Za'Darius Smith is a loss for the Vikings defense. We knew, I think all of us pretty much were resigned to the fact that he wasn't going to be a Viking in 2023, but it's still a loss for this defense. We had talked a bit about, if they could find a way to keep him. You got Daniil Hunter, you got Marcus Davenport and Za'Darius Smith. Dave, I know you were kind of looking at
I was all excited about that.
Yeah.
The idea of those 3 going at it on the field was just going to terrorize offenses. I thought it'd be great. But there was the financial consideration to all of this, and that's what led to this move. That and he wanted out. And we know that's been done before. Stefon Diggs.
Yes. Yep, exact. 2019, Diggsy wanted out because he didn't like the way the offense was going and his role in it. And there was no talking him out of it. The Vikings, Rick Spielman, the general manager at the time, they had to make a deal. I think they made a good deal. They got quite a bit of compensation from it. And what they did with the compensation ended up, particularly with Justin Jefferson, that's worked out well for the Bills and it's worked out well for the Vikings. In this case, though, a little bit different situation. Not exactly the same bargaining power that the Vikings had in this case that they had with Diggs. And, Dave, you can kind of look at in the off season after the season happens, how did the conversation go with Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Za'Darius Smith? It probably went like this. Smith goes, "Hey man, I just got 10.5. I signed a below market value deal with you guys. I just was basically your most valuable player on defense for half of the season. I ended up with 10.5 sacks. I was healthy, or I played just about all of the games. I need to be compensated differently. I'm not going to play for the contract that you've got me signed for now." Kwesi Adofo-Mensah said, "Hey, hold on here, Z-Man. You are under contract for 2 more years. Have you looked at our salary cap situation lately? We can't afford to give you a big deal. It's so either, we'll try to do what we do, but either you play for what we signed you for and that you willingly signed for, or
pennies." The second year of his contract, and we'll get into this, was for $15.5 million.
Yeah, so that Kwesi said, "Hey man, this is where we're at. I don't know if you're not happy with it. This is what we're prepared to do. I guess we'll look at a way to get you out of town if that's how you feel, because we can't go any more than where we're going." I think that's probably how it happened, and so the Vikings got what they got. They got they traded him to the Browns, and again, I understand why they did the deal. I think most of us do. It was a financial situation, and also you had your player. If the Vikings were not prepared to rejig Za'Darius Smith's contract, and that's what he wanted, then you've got an unhappy player. And again, you just can't have that during the year. You got to move him. But that doesn't mean that the deal that was made was a good deal. I think that the Vikings lost on this deal.
For those that are wondering.
Wild turkey. I feel that the Vikings lost in this deal. You look at the compensation. They traded away a veteran player. He's aging, yes, but he's productive when healthy, not always healthy. But they traded away a guy who was a key piece of their defense last year and still has pass rushing ability. He's still a good player. The Browns have him now. The Vikings get a 5th rounder back for next year and a 5th rounder back in 2025. 2025. And then they gave up a 6th rounder and a 7th rounder in next year's draft. So they didn't add draft picks to this by giving away a player. They got slightly more valuable day 3 picks, but they didn't add any to their haul. And the other thing is, and we don't know exactly what the financials land, but we're also taking on some of his salary. So, uh,
Well, and there are reports on that.
yes,
It came out
I haven't seen him.
per Mary Cabot. The the Vikings will cover 3.3 dead cap money plus part of Z's new guarantee of approximately $5 million. So that would be 8 million, right? Now
Yeah.
I've got the contract up there right now per OTC. Last
Mm-hmm.
year he had a cap number of 3.166666666, right? Um, this year he would have had a guaranteed salary of minimum a little over 5 million. He was going to make 15.5 million. So if you take that, if you look at it from a money standpoint, even paying the 8 million we're supposedly paying the Browns to take him, plus the 3.166666666 on infinitum that we gave him last year, that's still only about 11, little over $11 million we paid for him on a 1 year rental, right?
Mm-hmm.
And supposedly when he came to the Vikings last year, it was with the intent of it being basically a 1 year deal, and then they would renegotiate after the first deal. That's why I think Z was so bent out of shape. Is when the Vikings, when he came back to say, "Hey, now pay me for what I'm worth," I had 10.5 sacks. I had 9.5 of them or whatever it was in the first 9 games before I got my knee bone bruised and then my tweaked my elbow later. And they said, we can't afford it. Can you imagine saying, hey, we've got to now account for 15.5 million? We'd have to do something somewhere else just to make room for Z if we retained him. So, but if you add that 8 plus the sum from last year, say 11.5 million, would you give 11.5 million for a top 20 edge rusher? Heck yes.
Oh yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean that's a good deal. Now, when it comes to the
It,
draft picks, you you, you said, yeah, we improved 2 day 3-1s. If you use the Rich Hill chart and then you give values for those draft picks, the Vikings win that one easily. A third rounder's worth approximately 17 points, or pardon me, a fifth rounder's worth 17 points. A sixth is worth 6, and I think a 7 is worth 3, if I remember the numbers correctly. Yep. And so we're gaining 34 points worth of value and giving up 9. Difference is 25. If you look at where 25 falls on the Rich Hill chart, that's mid-round fourth. So if you want to take it, now granted, they're 2/5. If you average it out, it's a mid-round fourth. But if you take those 2/5, merge them together, we got a value of a mid-round fourth for a guy that was going to leave anyways.
yes, and the other thing, which is that we created some salary
Yes.
cap relief, which is important because the Vikings, before this trade was made, they had basically 1.1 million in salary cap space according to Over the Cap, which is nothing. It wouldn't even get you to sign a couple
The
of your
rookies.
draft picks, the rookies. So they needed to create space. This was a pretty obvious way to do it. But again, when you're looking at the player you gave up, sure, you didn't want to be here, but as a fan, you're kind of like, well, that's not such a great deal. Couldn't you got a little bit more? Did you have to give away draft picks to sign them? So that is the fan in me. I don't think this is a great deal, but to be fair to Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and we have to be fair, and you're gonna, and other people have already mentioned this, is that he's for one thing, not every move that he's going to make am I going to think is a great move.
Well, and
and
there's a lot of
everybody's
people already that think he's failing. But
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and they're idiots. But but if you look at Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, and he's looking at it, I think, in a few different ways. Like we mentioned, you got a player who doesn't want to be here. That's a problem. You can't pay him what he wants to be paid. So you've got to do something. Sometimes the deals that you get, you don't have the greatest bargaining position. Sometimes you're not in an advantageous position, and the Vikings were not in this case. They got a player who doesn't want to be here. Everybody in the league knows that.
Yeah,
They
he
got
publicly went out and sold the
yeah.
house, put out the tweet. He wants to move on.
He wants to move on. Everybody in the league knows that, so that's a bargaining chip away from you already. And the other part is everybody in the league knows what the Vikings salary cap situation is. So what's they can use that against Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. The other part of it is that to get this deal done, to trade Za'Darius Smith, you had to find a player. You had to find a team that was willing to renegotiate his contract as part of the trade. So that adds another complexity to it, in that you got to find a team that's willing to, sign him to a better deal before you trade him. I think that lessens your bargaining power as well. And for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, he's probably looking at it again. No, I don't want to give up draft picks, but if I can improve my draft position, even if I'm not adding any picks in this trade, and I can get the salary cap space that I desperately need, and get this off the books and allow me to sign my rookies and maybe address some other things in the season, or at least this gives the Vikings at least one of the big moves that they have to make to be able to operate in the league this year with enough cash to do things in case somebody gets injured, or a few people have to get injured and you have to sign other guys. The rainy day fund. That's, I think, how he was looking at it. I don't think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah loved this deal, but I think that he felt that based on the salary cap situation, the player situation, and the fact that he signed Marcus Davenport. So you've got a guy who can plug in and play and take Za'Darius Smith's position, even if you trade him, and you've still got DJ Wanham and Patrick Jones the third as your depth guys, and that's still pretty decent depth. I think that's how he was looking at it. And again, sometimes the deals that you have to make aren't always what you want to make. They aren't the best deals. They're not going to be a deal that fans are going to look at and say, man, the Vikings won that. They put it over on the Browns. That did not happen in this case. And I said, not a great deal, but we also don't know. I'm sure Kwesi Adofo-Mensah canvassed the whole league as best he could as to what Za'Darius Smith, we're looking to move him. Talking to teams about what they might get. Maybe this was the best deal that was out there too. And the other thing to keep in mind is that, again, you kind of got something, you got something where maybe if you release him, you don't get anything. You upped your draft pick value, your draft capital. And I think the other thing is that if you look at over the cap, one final thing, Dave, is that the Vikings could have released him, but that would have given them less. They would have ate more dead cap space, and they wouldn't have created as much cap space by releasing him even post June the 1st than by trading him pre-June the 1st. So there's some math involved here for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah. There's a lot of math, I think, salary cap and yep. and the draft cap value, and the fact that he had a roster that he felt comfortable with at edge, that he had guys that could replace Za'Darius Smith. So I think that's why he made the move. I don't think was thrilled about doing it, but sometimes you got to make deals that don't look that great on the surface, but are short term and long term are better for the franchise.
And we're going to get into this with Dalvin Cook probably right after June 1st as well, because everybody expects him to be moved, and we're in almost identical situations where everybody knows Minnesota's situation. They know they're probably going to move on Dalvin Cook. They're waiting for him to be cut. But if they trade for him, they're going to have to cut some of that, or going to have to make some of that $14 million salary,
yes,
less impactful on whoever trades for him. Hopefully he can work that team. Now, the Browns, Kwesi obviously has the relationship with that front office because he was in it back then. That helps. Let's hope that's the case when we get to the Dalvin Cook trade or post June 1st cut, because that's on the way, folks. Be prepared for it. I'd be shocked if it didn't happen, but be prepared for that. Now, with this, there was one last thing I wanted to put up. You and I had talked offline, and you had asked, let me hit the right button. If Spielman made this trade, we'd call him a dope. And I absolutely agreed. Yeah, we would. But all this is part of cleaning up the Spielman legacy. Yes, Z was their guy, but it is an effort to make last year competitive and help with the transition to a new defense. He did that while doing the competitive rebuild and eventually get Cap healthy. To me, this is the big point. Playing all these financial tricks to bump salary down the road, right? Either be it with his contract, which is not the big cause of the pain. The pain comes from another contract where they put in a bunch of void years and stuff like that. But where they can do that, eventually, like I've said before, all that comes to, at one point, has to be paid. This is part of that paying process to get healthy. They've got to do this. So next year, yeah, we're paying $8 million this year, but next year we're paying $0 when it comes to Za'Darius Smith, and we have room, a little bit more room, to maneuver and get healthy while staying competitive. Like I said, we got Davenport. While staying competitive, but have room. We gained a little bit of extra draft clout that may go towards trading up for the QB of the future, because that's coming, whether it's next year or the year after. That's on the docket no matter what. This builds that up. And I think it was probably the most optimum move Kwesi could have made for what he had.
Yeah, we've gone over that. It's funny because not that Spielman didn't deserve his criticism, but again, I just feel that, like, with the feelings and the dislike of Spielman towards the end of his tenure, even if he makes this deal again, everybody is trashing it and saying, what an idiot. And even though, if you rationalize it like we have done, you can see why you as a Viking, as Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, had to do it. Yeah. But hey, just an observation on my end. Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the luster is quickly coming off his
off. But hey, we
is
always
coming off his bust.
That Spielman kept old guys on way too long. And we said, no, we got to be more like New England, where you get rid of them too early rather than too late. Well, this is an example of that. It's what we asked for. So I really have no issue with it, other than I was so excited to see all three of those guys on the field at once. That was going to be exciting and quite pleasurable. But it won't happen.
Aaron just made a thing about saying like Za'Darius wasn't loyal to the Packers. No, he wasn't. I think Za'Darius Smith is, as I think all players should be, is loyal to himself and getting the most money he can in the short amount of time he's going to be playing this game. I don't begrudge guys for that. There was a few jokes when Smith sent his farewell on social media by Packer fans saying, "Oh, there's the annual Za'Darius Smith, I want a new contract" ploy. So we'll see if the Browns have to deal with this next year as well, if Z has a better year than they're anticipating.
And somebody had mentioned the Browns, if their quarterback play gets better, which we anticipate, Watson gets better, and their defense, they should be better. I'm all for it in the AFC. Let the AFC, where there's an arms race, beat up on each other. By all means, go right ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Harms, it's good to see you over here, brother. I appreciate it. Glad you've joined the show. Yes, Aaron, there's something to be said. He signed the effing contract. But there's sometimes when players have leverage, and in this case, or means of getting out of contracts in this way, he did.
I always say about they signed the contract. That's true. But teams have no bones on cutting a guy that they've signed a contract to immediately if they don't think that he's doing the job or they can find somebody better. So I have no sympathy for NFL franchises who cry the thing. You signed a contract when they're just quite willing to cut a guy, no matter how long tenured or short tenured, as soon
And
as
no
he's
matter
not.
what their contract was, yep.
Yeah, yeah. And as soon as he's no longer useful to the team. So it kind
Hmm.
of cuts both ways, I think.
Hmm. And Aaron, you asked about Dalvin. We'll get into Dalvin when the Dalvin situation arises, which should be in about 2 weeks
Should
or so.
should be soon.
And that brings us to theme two. Here we are analyzing the schedule.
Schedule dropped Thursday, right? It was the
Hmm.
11th.
Thursday night. We all knew
So we
about one
knew,
o'clock on Thursday. There's enough leaks that we had the final schedule, but officially Thursday night at 7 Central.
so we've known for a while who the Vikings are going to play. That wasn't the issue,
Hmm.
and we knew that the schedule featured some difficult quarterback duels there. But we didn't know how it was all going to shake out, like when we're going to be playing, which teams, and what months, and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's kind of also part of the important thing of the schedules is that you can have a different schedule, but depending on how it all lays out, some are more manageable for your favorite team, like the Vikings, than maybe others when you get a very difficult part of the schedule where you get stacks up and you look at it and you kind of we're going 1-4 in that stretch and that's not very good. So coming out on the 11th, we now have an idea. We now know when the Vikings are going to be playing, and that allows us to kind of look at, okay, how might the Vikings do? What are the tough stretches? What are the real big issues? The first thing that that I saw that people were mentioning was like just the amount, the five right now, five primetime games,
And
which is
they're
more than the Vikings,
indicated in green on that schedule slide. Yes.
which is more than the Vikings have had in a few years, quite some time.
But
I
be
now a couple of them,
advised,
yes,
as of week
there's some flexing.
12, which is the Bears game, Monday night Bears game, they can be flexed out or flexed in.
Yes. So they could even have more than five primetime
Yes.
games, depending on how things go. I don't know if the Raiders and the Vikings game is going to be a hot ticket, but you never
Oh,
know.
there are people already buying their plane tickets out of Minnesota to Vegas specifically for that game. Just because it's December in Minnesota and Vegas is warm and Vegas is Vegas and it's an excuse to get out of Minnesota. And supposedly the airlines cranked up their fares, Minneapolis to Vegas, 400 up to 400% as soon as that schedule released.
Yeah. So I myself, Dave, I don't know about you, but I hate the Vikings in prime time because I like watching them at 11 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Mountain Time. Gets the day, get to watch it early. Then I get the rest of the day to watch other games and not worry about shit. And if they're when they're playing prime time, I got to wait all day for them to play, and they play at night. They generally shit the bed in prime time, and then I've been waiting all day, and then as I go to bed, um, I'm cranky as hell because the Vikings have lost and not played very well in prime time. So most times
Well,
I'd be
that's
happy
you. If
they
I'm back
didn't.
on the East Coast, that means like post game shows at midnight, 1 o'clock, and it makes for a long night.
It, and but that's just me. Some people like the excitement of the primetime games. I'd hope I'd be happy if they never played any primetime games, but that's just me. But looking at the schedule, Dave, I think it all to me. Looking at this, the season is going to be made or not made by those first seven games that we're looking at right there. Um, you got in the first 7 games, you're going to play the Super Bowl champion. You're going to play the team that was lost in the Super Bowl, the Eagles, and then you're going to play the
Oh,
49ers. you're going to play the 49ers, who
Uh-huh.
were which if Brock Purdy doesn't get hurt, maybe they're in the Super Bowl, right? So that's a pretty tough test.
There you go.
You were, and that's a very tough test. I think you've got, so during that first 7 games, Dave, if the Vikings somehow can manage to go like 4-3 in that stretch, or maybe even 5-2, that's going to really set them up well for later on in the,
Mm-hmm.
I think, in the year, because I don't know, like it just feels like, I feel they'll be in pretty good shape for the final 11 games to make the playoffs, repeat as NFC North champions. They've got, after that, they've got, I think, a much more manageable stretch where you've got Atlanta, New Orleans, Denver, Las Vegas, a home
Mm-hmm.
game against the Bears, and then you got the bye week in week 13 after you had the first 7 in the following games. Again, if that's a favorable stretch of games for the Vikings. I think where potentially they could rack up some wins, make a
Mm-hmm.
strong push for the division and the playoffs, if they can take care of business in those first 7 games, which have some difficult matchups. And you've, even in that first 7 games I didn't mention, you've also got the Chargers, another
Yep.
playoff team in 2022 with a great young quarterback in Justin Herbert in week 3, and then you got to play on the road in Soldier Field, and we know that there's no games. There's rarely a game. Last year was an exception. When the Vikings go to Soldier Field, it's never a gimme. And the Bears always seem to play us tough. And the Bears should be improved compared to 2022. So that game might not be as easy as last year's game at Soldier
Hopefully
Field
that's
was.
not the case, but we all know
Yeah,
that
that's right.
everybody's expecting good things from Justin Fields and hopefully taking his next step in development now that he's going to be their quarterback and all
Yeah,
that yada yada blah blah. I hope you screw it up, Chicago.
indeed. But again, going back, those first 7 games, I think is pretty critical, Dave. If you go, instead of going 4-3 and 5-2, if you go 3-4, or you go two
Two and
two and
five.
five, that's, that end. Then
Warning
you're
bells
playing
should be
catch up.
going off. Mm-hmm.
Warning bells. You're playing catch up. You'll have very little margin for error the rest of the season. You'll have to win a whole bunch of games in a row to hopefully even make the playoffs, and that's just not a situation you want to be in. So the Vikings are going to have to be ready right off the mark. I know they got Tampa Bay to start with Baker Mayfield. Supposedly, he will be. We assume he'll be the starter, so that should be a game that's at home that I think you can win. But again, the those first 7 games very tough. Vikings have got to come out and be on the positive side, on the win loss side of things, and again, if they can do that, and that's going to be the big test for Kevin O'Connell. He's going to have them ready right from the get go, just like last year when they went 6-1 in that first 7 games. If that's the kind of start, that was a dream start. I don't see that happen again this year, but they're at least going to, I think, have to be over 500 during that 7 game to really. I think if they are at that point, I'll feel good about the way the rest of the season is going to go, because we'll have done well in a very tough stretch of our schedule.
Well, let's
And
break it down real quick. First game,
yeah,
Tampa Bay. Do we expect anything out of Tampa Bay?
no,
I don't either. Baker Mayfield, Baker Mayfield has times of being a very good quarterback, and other times he's just a complete wreck. So, and the whole team is old and they've lost players and they're entering basically a rebuild deal. I'm not worried about Tampa Bay. The Eagles obviously has Jalen Hurts. They built up on their defensive line even more during the draft. They're scary. That, to me, they're very, very scary. However, they lost both their OC and DC to head coaching gigs this year.
yes,
So
true.
they've got new coaches coming up. Now, obviously, they kept the same head coach, but they've got new coaches coming up. And usually one of the two Super Bowl teams has a hangover the following year. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that in the second game against the Eagles at Philadelphia, it's them versus the Chiefs. Now, I'd love for both of them to have the problem, but hey, it is what it is. Now, that game's going to be tough, but it's tough on both teams because it's such a short turnaround from week one to instantly playing the Thursday night football game. But it gets it out of the way for us early in the season. We don't have to worry about it after that.
That's right, yeah.
And hopefully we'll be very healthy at that point. Most likely they will be too. It should be a good game. I'm looking forward to seeing it, but I do think the Vikings, if they play it right, and Kevin O'Connell and his offense in the second year, all doing the kumbaya and taking that next step because they already know everything, out offenses their defense, and then our defense, hopefully communication is in place by then and we're all nice and we squeak out a win there. Then comes the Chargers, right? We have a week and a half for the Chargers, roughly. And there you have two coaches that are similar. You've got the young stud playing quarterback over the Chargers, but the Chargers never seem to get over the hump. Whether they will this year or not, we don't know. It's going to be a good game. We'll find out. The Panthers. There we go to the Panthers. That is the Adam Thielen revenge game. Not that that's going to make a whole lot of difference. It's a good storyline. Do you have any issues thinking that even with the first round draft choice that the Vikings are going to have a hard time with the Panthers?
Not at this stage, unless the Panthers get off to a strong start in their first three games. They're another team that's rebuilding, and with a young quarterback and Bryce Young, as good as a lot of people think he is, he's going to struggle as well. I think early on, getting used to the NFL defenses, and and the whole playing against guys that are humongous and being able to see through them and throw over them and all that sort of stuff. So I think that's a game certainly the Vikings are favored in, even though it's on the road.
The next game is a Sunday afternooner, which means they'll probably most of the nation sees it against the Chiefs. T. Kubler says Chiefs will fall big time in 2023-24. We hope you're right, but they've got the best quarterback in football right now in Patrick Mahomes. That's going to be a tough one. Followed by, but go ahead.
I thought their draft was pretty good too.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see, but
followed by going to Soldier Field, which is always a tough place to play, whether because of the turf, if they want to call it that. It's just a weird stadium to play in, and we don't know. And then it's off to the Niners. Niners are at home. That's going to be a good one. Niner Sickness hasn't joined the show yet today, but I was going to give him grief about that. As Norpheus says, wonder who's going to play quarterback when we play the Niners. Is it going to be Trey Lance? Is it going to be Brock Purdy? Or is it going to be, their backup?
Sam Darnold.
We don't know, Norpheus. We don't know. And they're a very, very, very good team, as we all know. Their weakness seems to be their secondary, and the question is, who's playing quarterback? Could we win? Absolutely. We could win all of them if the chips fall, right? And, Odin shines down on us, but it's going to be interesting. Like you said, how we come out of those games is going to be a sign as to how the rest of the season goes, because the rest of it tends to get a little bit easier on paper. And then we have the bye at week 13, which is a late bye. But if we're in good shape, it's the perfect bye because it lets the team rest going into the back stretch.
And not a lot of like it also, I think it's an advantage is we don't play in Chicago or Green Bay late in the season when it's going to be cold.
I didn't even think of that for
which I think
this,
is
but
a
yes, you're
good,
right.
and we don't really play like Cincinnati might be a little bit cold that time of the year,
Mhm.
like December 17th, but it's not going to be, chances are it's not going to be super, super frigid. You might get some crappy weather conditions. I don't know, rain, that sort of thing. But really, that's the only game late in the year where
Weather may
Denver,
be a big factor.
yeah, where weather might be a big factor. And for an indoor team like the Vikings, I think that's a bit of an advantage and something that's worth mentioning.
Yeah, we've got a lot of
I,
inside games this year.
I don't think you
Besides
want to be.
Detroit always, but we got the Falcons, we've got uh, the Raiders play indoors, and all the outside games are relatively early, other than Cincinnati.
I don't think you. At least I never want to see the Vikings playing late in the season in Green Bay, especially if something is on the line in that game. I don't want us to be playing in minus whatever at Lambeau Field if there's a division title on the line, like it was in 2015, which we actually won that game. But
But
something I would like to avoid, and they are avoiding it this year.
we got to defend the North.
We do, and I think it's I think last year's 13-4 record for only Viking fans with the looking through the most purple tinted glasses would have said that they expected them to go 13-4 last year. And they did. I Be great to see them do it again, at least repeat as NFC North Division champions. But that again, that first 7 games is going to really determine to me. That's going to sell it all. That by then our season could be over, or it could be just getting started on something that's builds on what we did last
Really
year.
special.
Yeah, because if you can play Philly, Kansas City, even and San Francisco, and you can win 2 of those 3 games, and the Chargers too. Like if instead of like last year where those kind of games are like blowout games,
Mm-hmm.
for the Vikings, or we'd win them by this like the
That
slimmest of
last
margins.
minute
But
come from behind.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Heart
but
attack.
we can go in and win a couple of those games, and all 3 of those games look like play a solid game where we are in it and clearly just as good as the other team that we're facing. I think that'll make me feel a lot better about the Vikings than I felt last year towards the end of the season after seeing what had happened to them when they played Dallas, what had happened to them when they played Philly early in the year, what had happened to them even when they played the Colts for 3 quarters of that game. There was just a lot of warnings, flags that were popping up as the year went on, even though we kept saying, well, they find a way to win. But the nagging part of us was like, yeah, but a 13-4 team shouldn't need to have the greatest comeback in NFL history to beat a
Right,
bad
against
Colts
the
team.
Colts. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of Dallas, obviously they're not on the schedule. The only time we would meet them is in the playoffs. Being down here in Austin, Texas, and Aaron, I'm sure, can attest to this. They are all full of themselves already this time of year, and they're spouting all over the place. They're thinking 13 wins minimum for their team. We'll see.
Yep. If I was a Cowboys fan, I'd probably feel the same way right now. Like I'd be like, yeah, based on their draft, the defense is going to be awesome, and the offense won't be too shabby either.
Mm-hmm. Justin was at a Colts game with as a kid. Good for
I'm
you.
a I'm a I am I admire the fact that he didn't walk out of there at halftime
Mm-hmm.
after what he saw,
Mm-hmm.
because
Uh,
I would have.
if you, Justin, if your daughter saw that Colts game from last year and saw the comeback, that's got to be special. That's got to be special. All right, that brings us to theme 3. Quick hitters.
Yes, sir. 3 topics today. Going to go on just a lot has gone on. So just little quick hitters that touch on a few different subjects instead of just going waiting a little while and taking them one at a time. But I wanted to talk about the cornerback um, room with the Vikings. My favorite topic now that Irv Smith Jr. is no longer with the Vikings, but cornerbacks and you know
How that
clearly I've
room's
had concern.
developing.
Yeah, well, clearly I've had concerns about the cornerback room for a long time, but I think now the Vikings have 12 corners that they have on the roster right now, and they added Byron Murphy in free agency. That was their big free agency signing, and they drafted a couple of corners in the draft. Of course, they drafted Mekhi Blackman, and then they drafted Jay Ward as well. And that's improving the room. But I think even with the Murphy signing, Dave, and the selection of Blackman and Ward, kind of what the Vikings, what they've showed, the fact that they haven't signed, well, they signed Jawan Williams, but I don't really count him as a veteran that I expect, that I really have confidence in, can come in and play and make a positive impact on the Vikings secondary in 2023. But he is another veteran they signed. But based on what they did with their signings and free agency and what's happened in the draft, they didn't. And they took Addison in the first round at wide receiver instead of taking a cornerback when Joey Porter Jr. was still there, when Deonte Banks was still there, a couple of guys that had been mocked to them. They took the wide receiver, and then they waited until the third round to address the cornerback position by getting Blackman. I think that kind of shows that the guys, that a couple of guys, Caleb Evans and Andrew Booth Jr., that those guys, that Brian Flores, that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, they feel good about what Booth and Caleb Evans can bring them in 2023. They feel confident that they're counting on them to play a big role in that secondary, and I think that they feel comfortable with them playing a big role in the secondary. Otherwise, they might have tried to sign maybe another veteran who's had a bit more playing experience than Jawan Williams, who's had more success at the pro level, instead of just Byron Murphy. I think that's noteworthy. We'll have to see if it works. And Blackman and even Ward could have a big role with the team if they, even though we expect that Booth and Caleb Evans are going to be, along with Byron Murphy, are going to be the top three cornerbacks, but that might not be the case. But it's kind of wide open right now. But I do think that Booth and Evans, I feel a little bit better, I think, now that it's clear that the new defensive coordinator, Brian Flores, he wouldn't have signed on with this team, and he wouldn't have signed. I think he might have been, I don't think that the Vikings going for Addison in the first round. I think that shows more that Flores feels pretty good about Booth and Evans, which makes me feel a little bit better about Booth and Evans and the fact that they might be playing a bit more too in 2023. Again, is it going to work or not? I don't know. Still concerned, but just something to keep in mind. If I felt worth mentioning that those guys, they must have the coaches. They must be in favor with the coaches. The coaches must feel pretty good about what they can do.
Right. And as we all know, cornerback is one of those long-term developmental spots. It's rare that you get somebody extremely good a rookie year. I mean, that's buku rare, less than 5%. It usually takes 2-3 years for a cornerback to get up to speed to the NFL level. And these guys are entering year 2. Now, I really like Blackman. I love the pick of Blackman. I love what he can bring. But, again, he's behind the power curve. But I think it gives Flores a whole bunch of opportunity to mix and match and do his who are we playing thing. I know this guy, whether it be Blackman, Booth, Evans, Murphy, can play against this style of receiver well and shut him down. So I'm going to put him on here, and then I'm going to move these other two guys over here, and he's doing this all during the game to confuse. And by this, for the audio listeners, I'm moving my hands. I come from Italian heritage. I talk with my hands. But moving chess pieces around the board so that it comes up with the best defense. From a military standpoint, you're moving your troops around to give the best defense or the best offense count. And when you're thinking defense, of counterattack, of how to be in place to defeat the guys coming in. And I think the way Flores views this, at least I hope he does, that he has good people, like you said, that he bought off on that he's not like, hey, Minnesota offers me a job. Do I want to go take it? Well, no, they suck. They got the wrong type of personnel. There's no way I'm going to succeed and go on to my next step. Screw that. I'll go someplace else. That didn't happen. He said, yes, no, this is a good fit. I like this. I can work with what we have already, and we can get more, and we can get better. And I like that, and I think you've hit it right on a nail on top of the head, that this could turn into what was a weakness for the Vikings into a strength.
And you mentioning about how cornerbacks take a while, the Sauce Gardeners I find are pretty rare in the NFL that just come right out of college and do what they did in college, which in Sauce Gardner's case, he was shut down from day one in the NFL. Pretty impressive. Usually it takes a while. Xavier Rhodes is a perfect example of that. He was into year 3 or 4 before he really got it. Hopefully Evans and Booth are quicker studies and don't take that long because we need them to play much better than they did as a rookie. And as was mentioned in a comment earlier, also be healthy for the whole year because health has been a problem for them in college, and it was in their rookie year in the NFL as well. And with the depth that the Vikings have at the cornerback position, which still isn't, there's concerns. We can't have these two guys getting hurt for large stretches of the season, or else you're going to have a guy like Jawan Williams come in and play him, and you don't want him to. You're going to have maybe a guy like Mekhi Blackman playing more than you would like, or even Jay Ward. So, health is important for these guys.
Yep, I agree completely. Davey posts that he's not a big fan of the 3-4, but if we keep Hunter, he'll thrive better in a 4-3 instead of a 3-4. Davey, I tend to disagree. I think Hunter is just enough of a physical freak. He thrives in both. Now, we talk about learning curves. It took him half a season last year under Donatel before he started being productive. And so we sort of got a half and half, with half being Za'Darius in the first 9 games. And then in the second bunch of games, Daniil stepped it up and was back to his normal self. I think if we make him happy, right? Daniil's an issue. We talked about Cook earlier. Daniil Hunter's an issue that's going to be coming up in the relatively near future. Yes, he's under contract, but he's only getting paid $5 million or so. That's too low. He's going to want more. So I think Daniil would be fine. And I think the way Flores uses people is to maximize what they do best. And if that's putting Daniil on the edge with his hand in the dirt, like he does in the 4-3, even though we may call it a 3-4, and most of the time, folks, we're less than 25% in base. We're going to throw nickels and dime packages and all sorts of other things. But if he put his hand in the dirt and let him go get the quarterback. Quarterback over there, kill the quarterback. Do that, right? Which is what an edge rusher loves. It's just like, oh, quarterback, right? And that's what they do. They focus. I'm going to hit that quarterback, whether he's got the ball or not. I don't care. I'm going to hit him. I'm going to make him make choices a whole lot quicker, which helps the team. I'm going to get the quarterback. Quarterback. That's what an edge rusher thinks. That's what they should think. I think Daniil will do just fine. Like I said, I think it took him the first half of the season to learn the adjustments. I think Donatel used him wrong, used the whole defense wrong for that matter, but he did adjust and it became his old self. So I think he'll do just fine. I'm not worried about that. That brings us to the second quick hitter, safety spaces.
Yeah, but mostly this week when the schedule came out, the Vikings Entertainment Network, they they interviewed a few players to get their thoughts on the schedule, and they interviewed Lewis Seen, who's now going into his second year. Last year, our first round pick. And Dave, I've said this before, but every time that Lewis Seen gets interviewed, I'm always impressed by what he says and how he says it. Very well spoken guy, seems really intelligent, which I like in a football player. Rockheads can be good football players too, but I think it helps if you're smart and talented.
That's right.
Yeah, and and he got interviewed by them, and they talked about. They asked him a question was basically, what can Vikings fans expect to see from you and the Vikings defense in 2023? And Scene said, well, I don't really want to talk about me, but I want to talk about our defense. Another thing that I like to hear from him, team first guy. But he said, and this really, here's what he said, exact words is like, I think you're going to see a lot of speed, aggressiveness, and all out malice. And I'm like, man, I can two thumbs up for that answer, Lewis Seen, because I love it, and if that's what we're going to get from him and Brian Flores and the whole thing, I'm all for it. After what we saw last year with Ed Donatel, and it also made me think of that, Lewis Seen last year, as he's got a new defensive coordinator this year. Really, Lewis Seen last year, it wasn't a great year for him. Clearly, he wasn't going to be the starter. I don't know if he would have been got to this. He didn't see the field much. He didn't beat out Cameron Bynum for a starting safety spot, which was a bit of a red flag. And then he had that gruesome leg injury that, it put him out for the rest of the year anyway. But
over in London, yep.
Yeah, but even if he had been healthy the whole year, Dave, really for a guy like Scene, who at Georgia, he was a guy who did a lot of things. They blitzed him a lot. He played in the slot and he covered slot receivers a lot. He was in the box a lot for run support. That kind of a talent, that kind of an athlete, he just being in the Ed Donatel type of defense where the safeties are way back, defending the deep, their main deal was to stop any deep passes and make any big passing plays. That was their main responsibility. Lewis Seen and Hitman Smith, for that matter, Lewis Seen's talents would have been wasted in Ed Donatel.
Right. Defense. It's antithetical to what we drafted him for.
Yes. Yeah.
Which made you scratch your head and, why did KOC pick Donatel if Donatel was going to run this style of defense? Why did we draft this guy?
Yes.
If he's just going to let him sit back 15, 20 yards and read a book and play, basically putting the safeties in a prevent position.
Might as well pick a safety in the 6th round if you're going to do that.
Right. It's just, it blew our minds last year. And, of course, at Donatel caught hell from the fans and eventually was told to retire.
So now that Donatel is not here and Brian Flores is here, and we've got to change to what we believe is going to be a more aggressive defense that are doing multiple things, asking players to do multiple things and not the same thing over and over and over. I think that I'm excited to see what Lewis Seen will do in this defense. First, he's got to beat out Cameron Bynum for a starting spot. So that's the first thing he has to do. But if he does, I'd really like to see, I'm excited to see if Brian Flores can use him like he used Javon Holland in Miami in 2021 with the Dolphins. Flores' last year's head coach there, where, again, Holland was all over the field, in the box, blitzing, in the slot, doing a bunch of things and not just being 20 yards down the field all the time. If Brian Flores uses Lewis Seen in that kind of a role, really intrigued to see how Seen reacts to it, how he performs, and what kind of a difference that makes in the Vikings defense in 2023. So something I'm really excited to see if Brian Flores can bring out the things that we saw at Georgia in Lewis Seen at the pro level.
Oh, that would be sweet. You spoke of Cameron Bynum. I've said this before. I'd love to see Cameron Bynum at nickel. See how he reacts down there. Say Flores says, "Hey, Cameron, we love you. You did great. All the film I watched, you're fantastic. But I'm starting Scene next to Hitman. But don't be disappointed. I'm putting you at nickel." And I would like to see. I want to see that hopefully experiment in the preseason, see how it works out. Because I think if we do that, I think Cameron Bynum could be a very good nickel, and that may solve the problem of who plays nickel and not
Right.
having to move Murphy in. And I think that would
Leaving
be.
him outside.
I think that'd be a good
And
solution, but we don't know.
Yeah, and Bynum's one of those guys too, who is again a multiple, right? Because he was a corner his whole career at Cal, got switched to safety at the pro level when he got drafted in 2021. But again, Flores can potentially use his cover skills, his corner skills that he knows very well, and use those, put those to use in the new Vikings defensive system that he's going to run.
Hmm. And but I do believe seeing. I think we're in. We can expect and in anticipation for a good season by this young kid and how Flores uses him. I expect him and Hitman both. I think the safeties will be dreaded by opposing offenses because those guys. Hitman may not move as fast, but he obviously hits as hard. And Scene is an absolute missile when he sees and goes. He tears things up. I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to it, and I do love his response of the all-out malice. Oh yeah, baby, that's the way I
Yep.
want my defense playing. Period. Everybody on the defense play that way. It's going to be great.
Yeah, and he may, this system may be better for him in that I hate the word sometimes, but the fact that Flores will be getting him to play downhill,
Mm-hmm.
like just hit something, hit a hole, hit somebody. Don't, I don't want you to like hang back and try to read what coverages are going on. Like see something and hit it.
Mm-hmm. It's going to be fun. Hey, I want an aggressive defense like that. We haven't had it since Zimmer's good defenses. So I can't wait. It's going to be fun. That brings us to our last quick hitter. I want to say RIP to the toughest Chicano. And I put that in quotes. I'm not the one that said toughest Chicano, but Chicano, for those that are suddenly throwing out flags of racism, is a term that folks, the culture, brought upon themselves back in the early 60s. It is a point of pride, and Joe Kapp himself was proud of it. And it's a wonderful culture. It's Americans born of Mexican descent, if you did not know. He was a tough SOB. And he meant a lot to the Vikings. He brought us to our first Super Bowl. Darren, tell us about him.
Well, I think everybody who's a Vikings fan for any stretch of time has got a, they can talk about Joe Kapp. In my case, Dave, his the year he's before my time really. When the year that he brought the Vikings to the Super Bowl championship, their first in 69/70. I was born in 1969, so I never saw Joe Kapp play.
Where I was
But
born in '63, and it was way early. I mean, he played when I was alive, and I would have been watching. And obviously, I went to the Bears game in '69 and have some memories of that, but at the old Met.
Yeah, and so what I know of Joe Kapp on the field is what I've seen in the highlights and the NFL films and the interviews and that sort of thing. Not the same as having seen him play, but Mister 60, 40 for
40 for
60,
60.
4660, I have a soft spot in Joe Kapp's heart because he got a start in the CFL, of course, with the BC Lions, won a few Grey Cups with the BC Lions before Bud Grant brought him over to the Vikings in 67. So, it's been a tough couple of months for Viking fans because we've lost two big icons, Mr. Bud Grant, who is the Minnesota Vikings, and then Joe Kapp, who, as Viking fans, the quarterback who leads you to your first Super Bowl, you're always gonna I think, have a soft spot in your
Mm-hmm.
heart for that guy. And Joe Kapp is that guy for Viking fans. the stats wise, it was a totally different era when he played, Dave, of course. But
Oh yes.
if you look at his stats, you're kind of like, how did this guy even get in the league? He never threw for 2,000 yards. He had 24 or more interceptions than touchdown passes, but
But he
when
does own the single game touchdown pass record at
true
7.
7. But you listen to his teammates, and that tells you a lot about why Joe Kapp was able to make it as a pro quarterback when he did, even when he was unconventional and maybe didn't have the best arm, but just fantastic leader of men, fantastic person, and somebody who told it like it was a guy who believed that the team trumped individual players, something that you don't see as much of these days.
Mm-mm.
And even with his stats being, I would say, a little bit underwhelming in his 3 years with the Vikings went 23-12-2 or 23-12-3 during his 3 years with the Vikings, so they won.
Mm-hmm.
and he now he had a great defense to go along with it when he was playing, but
Yes.
Joe Kapp was there to take the Vikings from a team that had been basically mediocre or worse since they joined the league in '61, and got them to the Super Bowl. And he always played tough, he always played hard, and he played hurt. And again, just a guy that with the leadership qualities that he had, the kind of man that he was. It's sad to see him go, and especially when we learn that he suffered from dementia slash Alzheimer's in his later years, and that seems to have been hit so many football players, and including guys like Matt Blair and the great Fred McNeil and the great Matt Blair. They also suffered from
Mm-hmm.
those kind of problems and probably were impacted by CTE. Joe Kapp was concerned that CTE was the reason why he had problems with dementia in his later years, and so really sad for me that that's the way he went out, but glad and honored that he was a Viking for the short time that he was, because even we're still talking about him 50 years after he last played for the Vikings, and he holds a special place in the hearts of a lot of longtime Viking fans and even some not so longtime Viking fans. So
Well,
just a
and
rest in peace, Joe.
yep, and he made the effort. He stayed out demanding more pay for players,
Yes.
and that directly or indirectly led to the NFL Players Association and the negotiation of contracts and the free agency and all that. All that started with Joe Kapp. And did he stay on the Vikings past 69? No. We brought in Fran Tarkenton because he held out in 70. But you gotta love. He was tough. He was, like I said, a tough SOB, and that was, you gotta love that. And a guy playing football, it epitomized football, and so our hearts go out to him. All that remember him, like I said, I was 6, just turned 6 when I watched him play. It's just, he's a Vikings, part of Vikings history. Got us to the first Super Bowl. So we wish his family all the condolences, and Vikings family as well. May rest in peace. As Merlin, you can hear, speaks up to pay his tribute.
He is. Way to go, Merlin.
Well, that brings us to the end of the show and the end of your beer. So, which is good timing. Hey, I want to thank everybody that's joined us today. We've had good participation. Love it. Seen a lot of people we know. Norpheus used to be Norse Force. Good to see you guys here. Saw some new faces. That's awesome. Have you got any last words there, Darren, before we sign off?
Just waiting. Waiting to see what next week and the next couple of weeks bring for the Vikings. This is the kind of potentially is the boring part of the off season where you're just going to hear about rookie mini camp or OTAs, but the Dalvin Cook thing is the big thing that the Vikings need to resolve. And like you said, probably going to happen after June 1st, which isn't too far away. So we might not have any news about that next week, but in a couple of weeks from now, we may know more about what the future, like what's happened, what the Vikings are doing with Dalvin Cook. Are we cutting him, or are we going to trade him for another meager return, like in the Za'Darius Smith situation?
Don't go anywhere, Justin.
We will find out more.
As I was telling Justin not to go away, what we've got coming up on Vikings First and SKOL tomorrow, we always have the Real Forno show at 6 p.m. But tomorrow, we have a double header of the Real Forno show. Double header, Dave? Yep, we have a double header. We have a matinee at approximately 3:30 live. Keep tuned in to Vikings First and SKOL to get notifications, and Twitter if that's where you follow it. Tyler has on a guest, Mr. Connor Jones, NBC Sports. He is the NBC Sports draft expert. And, of course, Tyler, loves the draft. He's going to be talking about that and all relationships to the Minnesota Vikings. Then the Real Forno show at its normal time at 6 p.m. Central on this very channel. Tyler Fornes, myself, and Justin Day will be joining the show to talk your Minnesota Vikings. So, there you go, Justin. We look forward to you joining the show tomorrow night and us having a great time. And if you haven't heard already, we ask you to subscribe to the Vikings First and SKOL podcast feed. You get all our live shows on podcast. If you miss them, you can always rewatch on YouTube. If you can't rewatch on YouTube because of work or the wife or whatever, you can always listen on podcasts. Any of the aggregators. We're there. But on the podcast feed, we have some podcast feed only shows. Once a week, we do Skolling with Friends. This last week, we talked about Jordan Addison with Corey Conan of Pitt, the Pitt Talk Network. He talked about Jordan Addison's time at Pitt and him winning the Blitnikoff Trophy and how that will translate to the Vikings. It was a great show. I highly encourage you to see it. Plus, every day now, we do the Vikings Daily Opener. That's where I read news of the previous 24 hours. I do it in a very mellow, sort of NPR-ish voice. Not NPR, but, mellow that you could have over your morning coffee as you're driving to work. It's a great way to get your day started and a great way to get your fix. Make sure you subscribe to both. Like I said before, the podcast gets us our beer money. And Darren is low on beer. And we don't want Darren low on beer. We want Darren full of plenty of beer because he does better 2 old bloggers that way. Just to let you know. And he's out. Yeah, he just looked at his cup. It's empty.
It's empty.
Just to let you know. That's what we've got coming up tomorrow. Just tomorrow. And we got more during the week. So what do we say, buddy?
We say SKOL Vikings, baby.
SKOL Vikings! Like, subscribe, and ring the bell. And rate us on your favorite podcast aggregator. Darren and Dave, thank you for watching this episode of 2 Old Bloggers. We look forward to seeing you on every show on the new Vikings First and SKOL. You can find our podcast as part of the Fans First Sports Network. Sports takes for the fan, from the fan. SKOL, everybody!